Hey everyone, it's Ray's Radio, and today I want to share with you, this time I interviewed my friend and colleague, Devin, and I wanted him to share his cancer story, his cancer journey, and his experience. I'm sure there are lots of other people that have similar stories to him, and I'm sure there are lots of other people that have very different stories than him. This is his story. Tune in to hear Devin's wildly inspiring story about his explorations and healing advanced colon cancer. We explore themes such as having integrity as practitioners and in the medical system, remaining curious and compassionate as the best way to help people heal, how fear is used as a tool, and how feeling heard and given consent are one of the most important aspects of this journey. You'll also hear about Devin's most profound moment when he learned the diagnosis. Enjoy.
My name is Devin Blaney, and I am a professional chef, and I've worked as one for my entire adult life. And I am also a student of holistic nutrition at Pacific Rim College in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, which has been put on pause due to my diagnosis, and I appreciate you listening. I want to share my story with you today. And the story that I'm going to share is based off of an essay I wrote while attending school for holistic nutrition. Start off with the title of the essay that I'm basing this speech off of was The Importance of Maintaining Personal Integrity When Healing. Mm-hmm. I have subtitled this with Cancer Saved My Life, but the medical system might be trying to kill me. And so my essay was based around my personal experience being a patient. For most of my adult life, I have believed that Western medicine, allopathy, does not treat cancer well, that they are looking at it completely wrong. I have long stated that chemotherapy does not cure cancer, but that people who survive do so in spite of chemo, not due to it. Of course, this is a hyperbolic statement lacking nuance, as some treatments that fall under the chemotherapy umbrella do indeed provide statistically significant results. I was brought up in a holistic-minded household that used herbal medicine, homeopathy, and I was born at home. So I was biased towards natural medicine from a young age. I had long said that I would not use chemo and that I would likely use cannabis oil should I ever have cancer. On March 20th, 2024, I was diagnosed with advanced colon cancer. This diagnosis smashed me right up against my hubris and beliefs about cancer. This was scary and life-changing. The holy shit, I'm gonna die rang through my thoughts, along with this can't really be happening. This was as profound a moment as I can imagine, and most certainly the most profound moment of my life to this point. It was shocking, it was devastating, it was frightening and surreal, and yet I was not frozen by this diagnosis. I found myself wanting to share with friends and family what was happening, but I was also confused as to what to do and how to approach this terrifying reality. My fear took control, and I was ready to hand myself over to a savior. But I was already feeling a disconnect with wanting to be saved and with what I believed needed to happen for recovery. Thus began my experience with healing and reconciling my personal integrity with how the healing process is set up in our society. I was diagnosed via colonoscopy. The attending physician was blunt and clinical in informing me of the diagnosis. Witnessing the monitor in real time and seeing what looked like textbook tumors displayed in their gory detail was surreal, as was noticing the sudden change in demeanor of the attendants from upbeat and chatty to dour and sullen, followed by the blunt assessment that you have colon cancer, and it is shocking to see it so advanced in someone so young. You will need to keep your phone on as you will be contacted by specialists in the coming days. We put a rush on people with your diagnosis. Being advised of this in such a blunt way, while still on the gurney and sedated, was unkind. Thankfully, I was able to see that the physician was a pure clinician, and this was just the way he spoke, so I was not terribly wounded. This experience was not one I would wish to repeat, nor was it a wise way to initiate a healing process, in my opinion. I left feeling very shocked and unwilling to speak to the driver who was taking me home. There was no provision for counseling post-diagnosis, or any direction whatsoever on how to reconcile what had just happened. My needs were not considered. Only the disease was given my attention, or any attention. My emotional state had no place in the hospital environment. My beliefs around Western medicine were being confirmed right from the start, but my fears of death and loss of income clouded this noticing enough that I was still willing to be taken in by our allopathic system, going against my personal integrity. Island Health had a plan, only I didn't know it yet, as I was left waiting to be contacted post-diagnosis. A few days post-diagnosis, I was called by the imaging department to set up a CT scan. No other information was given, but at least I had a next step. This was followed by a meeting with an intestinal surgeon who was the first person to relate to me like a person with feelings. But what I was offered was the surgical removal of a significant section of my colon. I had to sign a waiver authorizing an ostomy bag if they ran into challenges, and I was advised of a small risk of death. Even though I had been presented with options that were intense and scary, I left feeling quite upbeat due to the respect, direct communication, and positive attitude of the surgeon. Though there was the dark cloud of being advised that my liver may be involved and that an MRI would now be scheduled. Post-MRI, I was finally scheduled to see an oncologist and counselor at BC Cancer. I was glad to finally be admitted to the cancer system. At least I was until I visited BC Cancer and met my oncologist. A darker day I have not experienced than this one. I was given an updated diagnosis of stage 4 and that it was likely terminal. I was informed that I had 9 to 12 months to live if I didn't take chemotherapy. And if I did agree to chemo, then I was looking at 18 to 24 months of life, but with all the side effects that chemotherapy brings. I left there with the knowledge, and I shared this with my mother who was with me, that I was not going to spend the rest of my life in that building regardless of if it were only for another year. This was not a place of healing, and I did not want to be treated by a person who did not think I would survive. How can you be a practitioner treating people if you do not think they will live? Why even bother? But it was not until after I visited my herbal oncologist that I had the context to catch how I was feeling about this, how my body was reacting to the path laid before me, how I was reacting to being in the system, and the impersonal style the medical system functions under. I was able to notice, with some help from a friend, that my body was constricted and tight and that I was exhibiting signs of disassociation. This was the moment that I got back into my body, reconnected with my beliefs, and said, no, I will not follow this treatment plan. I do not believe in chemotherapy, especially the oldest versions that were being prescribed to me. So I reached out to a naturopath I met in Ontario. I fired my oncologist and asked for a second opinion. And I resolved to work with holistic practitioners for my treatments and only use the allopathic system for scans, blood work, and testing. I felt like a weight had lifted and I was able to stand up straight again and have the resolve that I will heal this body, and sought out knowledge around how other people have survived terminal diagnoses themselves. I had returned to honoring my integrity and beliefs. But I've gotten ahead of myself in the story, so let's go back to when the surgery was performed. I had the surgery to remove 15 centimeters, 6 inches, of my sigmoid colon, along with a section of my rectum at Victoria General Hospital on April 25th of this year, or actually of 2024. This is when I started to wonder if I could trust the allopathic system on a general level. Everything started off according to expectations, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up post-surgery. As I've had experience with overdoing recreational drugs in my youth, I was not unaccustomed to waking from a sedated state. What was surprising was being informed that the MRI scan done a couple weeks prior had shown signs of possible metastasis in my liver, and that they had withheld this information from me until now, as they didn't want me to have second thoughts about the surgery. All while I was still semi-conscious. Even in that state, I was like, what the serious fuck is that? Then, when recovering post-surgery, I was given some documents about post-surgical care, some deeply hilarious and disturbing things about diet in them, but I digress. And of note was that I should avoid caffeine and alcohol. Avoid? How about abstain? But I digress again. So I was bemused to be served black tea with dinner, followed by coffee with breakfast and black tea for lunch. Funny, but also showing the disconnect that would turn out to be endemic to the entire system. I saw it in the lack of communication with the orderlies. My sponge bath stuff stayed in a bin untouched for the 3 days I was there, as when they arrived I had been served food and they never came back. I changed my own sheets with ones that had been left with the wash basin. I saw it in the communication between specialists and clinical doctors, the way my following MRIs were booked, and other sundry examples I won't bother to mention. My trust was falling away with each example. I was left with the thought that the best way to describe the medical system was that of a recently deceased octopus whose tentacles are still moving, some better than others, but the head is assuredly dead. I have now had 5 MRIs of my liver, actually now to 7, and each have shown the same lesions. But there has been an absolutely no change in any of the scans, showing that whatever they are seeing in the MRI images are stable. I'll put an addendum to this because I've recently had an MRI that has shown but I digress. Yet, even after the fourth stable scan, my liver surgeon pushed me hard to have the surgery, which would require the removal of my gallbladder and the entire right side of my liver. This would come with a high risk of hemorrhaging during surgery and post-surgical liver failure, and all for a 30% chance of a cure. He discounted the need to have a gallbladder as a mere inconvenience, and he actually said, "What do I need to do to convince you to have this surgery?" I felt like I was trying to leave a used car lot, the pressure was so thick. At no point did I feel like I was being seen or considered at all. It really felt like he just wanted to do the surgery because it was difficult and he could have the chance to be the hero, while also getting to do something challenging and cool. I did not feel accounted for at all, but thankfully I had already decided I was not going to have the surgery, so I could take all these pressure tactics and look at them objectively without emotion and say, "No, thank you, doctor, but I'm not going to go with this surgical option." I left there feeling good about my resolve, but also very leery of what the allopathic system might have in store for me. I am appalled at some of the techniques used by the people within the allopathic system. I was confronted with having pertinent information withheld in order to ensure I didn't reconsider the colon surgery, high pressure and scare tactics to go through with dangerous surgery to remove half my liver, which offered little chance of success, pressured to take chemotherapy or lose access to frequent testing, presented with a therapist who would openly share everything with the oncology team and would not listen to any issues not directly related to the cancer diagnosis, never receiving follow-up to my multiple requests for a primary care provider, no financial assistance made available, and making me bear the costs of required pre- and post-surgical medications without warning. Financial considerations played a significant role in what I was able to do for my treatment. I was essentially faced with the choice: if I take the Western system of chemo, radiation, and surgery, then I will get financial aid. But if I don't use the system and follow the so-called alternative approach, I will have to carry the full cost of that treatment, and I won't be given authorization to be on medical leave. This forced me to have to fundraise on my own, sell what I could, and once my last doctor's note expired, I had to go on to regular employment insurance, leading to the requirement I start looking for work. This may have been the hardest thing for me to reconcile throughout this process so far. If I had had any doubts or felt at all insecure, any one of these could have caused me to crack and either capitulate and allow the allopathic system to have its way with me or fall into a deep depression. I could have ended up homeless if I did not have the support I did, or was fortunate enough to have enough things of value that I could sell. I was and still am shocked at how little support our society has when you are diagnosed with cancer. If you do not have the money, you do not get the care. My eyes are much wider open now. Even now, 8 months with unchanged liver lesions confirmed by 5 MRIs over that span, I was pressured to have the liver surgery by my intestinal surgeon, who told me that if I didn't get the surgery, I would 100% not survive, which is an outright lie. This happened prior to him performing an endoscopy to check on my surgical sites. I felt unable to do more than say I'm not interested in the surgery and gave the potential negative outcomes as my reasons, along with a stable liver, but I was in such a vulnerable position, I did not wish to argue my point. This was vile behavior, in my opinion, especially as the diagnosis of liver metastasis, which is a stage 4 status, is only an opinion based solely on an MRI scan, coupled with the frequency of colon cancer metastasis to people's livers. But no definitive test has been done, nor will any of my doctors order one. I see this as examples of the deep arrogance built into the medical system, most unabashedly shown by the doctors, but it is even more subtly there in every aspect of the system. Even those nice nurses are party to the arrogance that is baked in. It has been almost 9 months since my diagnosis. Besides my stable liver MRI results, my blood work is also very good, with results that show a generally healthy person, not just good for a cancer patient. I am now working 2 part-time jobs and feeling for the most part better than I did before the diagnosis. I have been following an herbal protocol since May, and I have been having regular acupuncture, taking treatment plans from naturopaths, and following a German new medicine approach more recently. I have done some deep spiritual work, sought counseling and somatic body work, some psychedelic intervention, and an erotic healing retreat. The result has been that I am more who I am than I ever was. I have found the courage to take this diagnosis on with grace and curiosity. I am willing to express myself in authentic ways without fear, and I have found that I do not fear death. This is why I said earlier that cancer saved my life, and I mean that regardless of how long my physical body remains living. I think that what has served me so well in staying healthy and stable up to this point, at least, is that I found my center and kept my personal integrity throughout all of this. I believe that if you truly know that your treatment is effective, then it will be, regardless of if it is allopathy, a holistic approach, or indigenous medicine. My experience with my holistic team was far better than the Western system overall, but they were still guilty of rigid thinking and a lack of willingness to collaborate with other people in my team. I had to orchestrate my own treatment in order for it to align with my beliefs and knowledge, while still respecting and listening to the advice of each practitioner. If maintaining personal integrity is so important for the patient, how can we as practitioners ensure we are maced for, or better yet, encouraging our clients to be in touch with their own personal integrity? I don't pretend to have the answer, but I will keep this question with me every time I see a client or dispense with health advice of any kind. I think some of what we can do, though, is to keep being mindful that the person sitting before you is not the disease, but they are a person with emotions, needs, responsibilities, fears, potentially financially limited, and have their own ideas and beliefs around disease and healing. We must find a way to meet each person where they are while being true to our own knowledge and skills, which is why they come to us in the first place. Remaining compassionate and curious with humility at all times may be the most reasonable way to foster our clients' ability to heal themselves with integrity. I found one clinical trial based on back pain that shows statistical relevant results showing that when the patient and physician were in agreement with the treatment, the outcomes were better than when the treatment plan was pushed on the patient. I'll leave you with the request to consider the person, not just the disease, and make sure that the patient feels like they are involved in the decision process. Thank you for listening to my story and for sharing my journey through this dream we call life. And
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I have a few questions if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the first parts of your story was you had, that really profound moment, like, holy shit, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
I can just imagine that, causing trauma for your spirit in itself. What would you recommend? Like, if you had someone call you up and say, "Hey, I just had that appointment, same as you. I don't know how to deal with it." Like, how would you recommend that they sit with that information?
Um, well, what allowed me to sit with that information was the work I've already done to be in a state of acceptance of what is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that I don't know what is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And also understanding that whatever is happening, it is okay.
Yeah.
Uh, and but it's also to not push back on the feelings that you're having, to not repress and resent them and feel you shouldn't be feeling whatever you're feeling,
Yeah.
but to authentically and truly let those feelings come through. And if that's too intense, then to seek a an ear,
Mm-hmm.
or if you can get into a breath work or meditative state, if that's something that you are already familiar with. But
Mm-hmm.
I can say with as much confidence as I can say about anything is that if this diagnosis had been presented to me several years earlier, maybe only about 5 years earlier, I didn't have those tools,
Yeah.
and I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. So, but all I can say is that it has helped. The thing that helped me is the knowledge that I don't really know what's happening,
Yeah.
and I'm also confident enough that my spirit or my being will persist regardless of whether my body does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. And my next question, it's kind of funny, but I really thought it was interesting when you talked about firing your oncologist. And I think that most people probably don't understand that they can do that. They probably feel quite powerless in these situations and feel like they have no choice in the matter. And I feel like that was kind of a big thread throughout your talk. So how did it feel for you to kind of take your power back and say, you know what? No, I'm doing this a different way.
It felt it was the first moment that I really felt like I was directing this, and
Mm-hmm.
that I wasn't just being because when I first got into the BC cancer system, really much felt like I just stepped into the stream of treatment. There was no consideration of specifics. It was just, oh, so this is you, so this is how we treat you.
Right.
And that was, and I can only say that because of my previous, my beliefs that I didn't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easier for me to question.
Mm.
And what I did, thankfully, I had been read through the BC Cancer sort of manifesto, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, it does say you have the right for a second opinion.
Right.
But I did
Mm-hmm.
have to push to get that second
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
When I called to ask for a second opinion, they really pushed back, and I had to blatantly tell the nurse I was speaking to that what the oncologist told me, and I'm like, why would I bother? You know,
Mm.
so give me another one, and that was when they were willing to do it. But it isn't. They're not going to want to.
Yeah, you had to really advocate for yourself then, which is very
Absolutely,
scary for
absolutely.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the other theme that was present through my entire experience was fear. Fear was the
Mm.
tool being used by the
Mhm.
system.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned a lot of your experience around, and of course you have knowledge of holistic nutrition as well. And so, in your opinion, what are some of the food and changes around food and alcohol that you made that you know supported your body through this journey?
Well, as I've been learning and more about the biochemistry and systemic inflammation, um, what the changes that I made were to reduce anything that I felt was causing indigestion, which is like burping, bloating, gas, cramping, anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, I was mindful of and looked to avoid. And so I was already considering dropping grains or at least dropping like wheat because it
Mhm.
was that was one that was happening. But what I did is I I absolutely stopped alcohol completely.
Mhm.
And I had already been working on cutting that way back. So I was what would be considered a light drinker at that point, but
Mhm.
I stopped drinking a week before my surgery, and then or no, a week before my endoscopy, my colonoscopy, and then once I had the diagnosis, I was like, I'm not putting any more alcohol on
Yeah.
that because, and then I did my best to reduce sugar. Not that I was a heavy sugar eater, but and reduce and my vegetable oils,
Mhm.
um, and just tried to and then move to a diet that was cooked also because it was still kind of cool, but my with the gut irritation that I had to the surgery as well. I understand that cooked brothy foods, especially like bone broths, are really helpful for healing
Mhm.
the gut. So I did that, and then I made sure that, and I also was advised to reduce my caffeine, so I did. Um, I switched to some tea for a while. I've
Mhm.
recently had a different opinion on tea, um, and but I what I was also confident with going into this is my diet had already been shifting to a healing diet, so I didn't make a ton of changes besides like abstaining completely from alcohol and like removing any non-organic, non-fermented wheat from my system. Um,
Those are still
and
big changes, though.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
focusing on protein and eating a proper breakfast, like
Yep.
a protein-rich breakfast, and really being mindful of eating before I had any coffee and trying to eat within an hour and a half of getting up.
Wow. Okay. So what one of the themes that I picked out from your talk was that the most challenging part for you was that you didn't feel that you had a choice or a voice.
Yeah, and the big part of that was the financial side of it. I was really, and I still am, shocked that there isn't even a base level of support for you if you're not being physically incapacitated by your treatments.
Right.
And then the lack of, so that felt like the lack of choice was purely because I wasn't independently wealthy.
Right.
And so it really felt like my choices were limited by that. And the amount of free things that are out there are really not enough. And the only government supports that'll come to you if you're not following that path is that you have to be basically homeless at that point, and then they'll start giving you a meager amount, which is not enough. So
Wow. Well, I really appreciate your time, Devin. Like, it takes a lot of courage to want to share your story, and I just really honor you for everything you've been through and for wanting to talk about it. And I just want to quote one of your lines in your story as a way to close our time together today. That if we can remain compassionate and curious, that's the best way to help people heal while keeping our integrity. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.